Jessica Hatch is a professional freelance editor and novelist with more than a decade of publishing experience. She worked her way through the slush pile at New York-based literary agencies like Writers House, New Leaf Literary and Media, and Fox Literary Management, and learned what attracts readers to a book at St. Martin's Press. Jessica's editorial clients have gone on to receive partial and full manuscript requests from agents, to earn Kirkus starred reviews and placement on Best Book of the Year lists, and to win national awards. As a writer, Jessica has won Pitch Wars, attended juried workshops in Aspen, London, and Rome, and has been published in The Millions, Writer's Digest, Fast Company, Burrow Press, and Babes Who Hustle, among others. Her debut novel, My Big Fake Wedding, debuted at #1 on Amazon's humorous American literature chart. Jessica will be joined in conversation today by educator and poet Michelle Lizet Flores, whose accolades are also numerous. Apologies. Michelle is a graduate of FSU and NYU creative writing programs. She currently works as a teacher and co-hosts the What's in a Verse poetry open mic in Jacksonville, Florida. She has previously been published in magazines and journals such as the Miami Rail, Chircú Journal, and Travel Latina. A finalist for the Juan Felipe Herrera Award for Poetry, she is the author of the chapbooks Cuentos from the Swamp and Memoria, as well as the picture book Carlito the Bat Learns to Trick or Treat. Her short fiction can be found in the anthology Places We Build in the Universe through Flowersong Press, and her first full-length collection of poetry, Invasive Species, is forthcoming through Finishing Line Press. Michelle, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Allison. Good evening, everyone. So let's jump into it. First, big congratulations, because you have published not one but 2 books within the span of, I believe this is 6 months now. Is that correct?
Yes, August and February. In the span of a year makes me feel a little less crazy making when I say it like that.
But when it's 6 months, you realize, oh boy, that's not a lot of time.
That's why I've had vertigo.
Exactly. So thinking about that, I'm really curious, as a poet, fiction writing is very different. Novel writing especially is very different.
Yes.
What is your writing practice and your working style?
Well, so first off, I want to say thank you. And I'm very honored to be being interviewed by one of my favorite Jacksonville poets. Poetry to me is like an arcane practice, which I enjoy listening to, but cannot do very well myself. So in awe of you.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your upcoming book.
Thank you.
So my writing process, especially in the form of that kind of generative process, is the question. Anyone who's heard me speak about my writing for more than 2 seconds will know that I'm a huge fan of ritual. It really helps you drop into a creative headspace right away, rather than having to like really strain to find that creativity. And when you say a big word like ritual, people think you mean like a shrine and things like that. No, like if you want the shrine, great, cool. But for me, that means I brew a fresh cup of coffee and I light a candle. And through some sort of Pavlovian response that's been honed over hundreds of writing sessions, it's really easy for me to drop into, okay, we're going to generate some words today. We're going to figure out that plot hole, whatever. I also, sorry for any fly by the seat of your pantsers out there, I do enjoy plotting. Yes, so I will typically have an outline, not like every single thing that's going to happen on the page, but like, okay, in this chapter, we have to get from point A to point B, and let's figure out how to do it. After that, it really just depends on the container worth of time I'm given. You know, my first book, My Big Fake Wedding, because I was doing a lot of life stuff, took about not a decade. Actually, from when I had the idea to when it was published, it was about 9 years, just because there was so much else going on at the time. And then, because I was under contract, How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days was written in a much shorter period of time. So once I've got that roadmap, the outline, and thanks to this ritual that I've created and honed, I can just drop in and go from there. Yeah.
Awesome. So you talked a little bit about your process for My Big Fake Wedding, but I am curious, what was the inspiration for How to Keep a Husband in 10 Days, especially because it had such a quick turnaround?
What was the inspiration for the content of it?
Yes.
Okay. So when you have a quick deadline like that, at least for the first draft, I think that it becomes write what you know. And first off, quick disclaimer, my husband and I are very happy and have never been on the brink of divorce like the couple in How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days. We're only 3 years in. We'll see. But no, it was just sort of like, okay, I have this second chance romance that I'm writing. This woman is unhappy. What are some of the nitpicks that we have? Her husband can be a little less clean than she is, and she can be a bit of a neat freak, that sort of thing. And then also writing what I know, I wrote about Jacksonville. My first novel, My Big Fake Wedding, I wanted it to be a love letter to the hometown I grew up in, which is Richmond, Virginia. And in the same way, Jacksonville, really, I wanted it to appear on the page in How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days. So for those of you who don't know, the plot backdrop on which the second chance romance is happening is that this couple fell in love in this apartment building, this historic apartment building in downtown Jacksonville. And it's being razed to the ground to be built into luxury condos. And their friend group is like, we have to save the building we all became friends in. It's where you guys fell in love. So their romance becomes the heart of the campaign. So I lived in downtown Jax for a while. It was really fun to put that on the page because, as a reader said, oftentimes books take place in big cities, New York, LA, DC, places that don't exist. It was wild, and possibly, even though Florida has become such a big place to write about, it was the first time she'd seen her hometown on the page, and that was very exciting for her. So where did I get the inspiration for How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days? Personal experience, write what you know. Then also one of my big sort of literary ancestors who I adore is William Shakespeare. And I loved the idea of basing it on one of his lesser known comedies, Love's Labour's Lost. At the end of Love's Labour's Lost, most of the time a Shakespearean comedy ends with a wedding and they all live happily ever after. The end of Love's Labour's Lost, it looks like it's going that way. You're actually going to have a triple wedding because that's how many couples there are. And then all of a sudden, the Princess of France learns that her father has passed away. And so all of a sudden, the women have to leave. And there's this lurch of like, will I see you again? And what will it be like in a year, 2 years, whatever. And so I wanted to modernize that. So a lot of people have said, I love your characters' names, Lena and Brown, and they're sort of modernizations of Rosaline and Barone, who are the main romantic couple in Love's Labours. So that was my inspiration, the long and the short of it.
So classic literature grounded in place, and then just writing from personal life experiences.
Yeah. Yep. And then obviously on second drafts and stuff, I try to massage it away from, like, for instance, I wanted to make sure my husband couldn't look at it and go, hey, hey. So
that's for the next book, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about this, but I'm curious about your process with the connection between place and your writing process in general in your writing, because having read your first book, it is also very much grounded in place. So what is that connection for you between the setting of the novel and the story that the novel is also telling?
Okay. So if I understand the question correctly, what is place bringing to the novel? Okay. Well, I will say one thing that I was concerned with when I was writing and being so specific about a place potentially. I mean, everyone in this room lives in Jacksonville, but potentially no one knows or has visited, was not being so hyper specifically local that people get bored. Whatever. I wanted to make sure that the place was a character. It lent itself to, like, you know, I think in the second chapter it describes the heat that we have in September. You know, most times people are like, oh, it's sweater weather up north. They're getting ready for fall and apple picking. And here we're like walking out into a wet wool blanket of heat and humidity. So feeling that kind of vibe. But what I didn't want to do, and what I've seen happen in workshops, maybe you've seen this as well, is someone will go, okay, he turned left on Oak Street and then he turned left onto Gilmore Street. And it's like, we don't need to know all the street names. We just need, where is he going? It's only going to matter if he's been told that someone's at that cross section of streets. That's when we should know it. So purpose of place, that was something I was really striving for. I hope I'm answering this question to your liking.
Yeah. I think there's that old saying, there's a universality of specificity, but you also don't want to bog your reader down to the point where they have no idea what you're talking about. So striking that balance of this feels familiar because every mid-sized town has these sort of markers, but not to the point where it's any mid-sized town. This is Jacksonville, Florida specifically.
Right. And interesting to that point, I mentioned chapter 2. I really feel like that's where some place setting happens and How to Keep a Husband. Like the opening chapters are all about the main library gets mentioned with the owl and key statue, which I adore. People are queuing up for food trucks in James Weldon Johnson Park, all of this stuff. And I remember that was one line edit where I pushed back gently against my editor. She said, I feel like this is a lot of description. Do we need this? I was like, I will trim it for pacing, absolutely. But I feel like especially there's a line about the Main Street Bridge going up so a yacht can pass under it. And I wanted to show that sort of haves and have-nots in Jacksonville that I think you see happen in a lot of mid-sized cities. You've got people who live on the St. John's and then people who are struggling to get by.
Absolutely. So switching gears, I want to talk a little bit about your influences, because what I love about both of your novels is that they are romances, yes, but they're also very tongue-in-cheek about it. So I'm curious as to what are your influences on your style of romance, and what do you normally read that helps feed that inspiration?
Okay, great question. My influences on the sort of romances I write. Well, first off, I'm very genre agnostic as a reader, meaning I don't necessarily just read romance or rom-com. I read pretty broadly in a lot of different genres. And I'll read a book that appeals to me because of its cover, its jacket copy. If I've had a friend recommend it or it's gotten great reviews, then I'll check it out, regardless of what it's categorized as in the BISAC system. As far as what sort of romances I enjoy, I love Emily Henry's work. Beth O'Leary, she has this great mix of like sweetly funny, but also tender and like thoughtful, if anyone is looking to check her out, The Switch is incredible. It's about a grandmother and granddaughter who switch homes. Like the grandmother lives in the north of England and the granddaughter lives in London, and they switch places. It's very sweet. And of course there's a romance happening in the small town romance. Great. And then also being a child of the 90s who was pretty much raised on television, I feel like all those rom-coms of the early 2000s, which it's no coincidence that my publisher, like My Big Fake Wedding is obviously a play on My Big Fat Greek Wedding, How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I think they very tongue-in-cheek, as my writing is, are winking at that. And the wink for me is important because I think what critique we get a lot as romance authors is, that's not a serious genre. You're not doing hard work in that genre. And I will contest that after this, but I think it's also important to go, it's not just no thoughts, just vibes, it's also like trying to, a lot of times romance novels are trying to either explore the genre, and that's what I'm trying to do by saying like, hey, this has been popular in our current time since at least Helen Fielding with Bridget Jones's Diary. So like, how can we parody tropes that exist, and how can I lean into tropes that I do enjoy? But then also I'll use romance novels, and a lot of romance novelists will do this as a platform to discuss bigger issues that women and non-binary people face. So for instance, in my first book, that was marriage equality. And in How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days, it's housing affordability and housing equity situations.
So this actually leads really well into my next question. Your books...
We did not rehearse that.
Promise. Or did we? The mystery. But your books incorporate a diverse cast of characters, and I'm curious for you, what is the function of equity and diversity within literature? Because oftentimes I think it can feel very... it gets a reputation for being forced, and what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. That is a huge question, and I hope that I can humbly do it justice. There are people who are answering this question a lot better and more thoughtfully than I will in the next 2 minutes or so. I think one of the primary functions of diversity, inclusion, and equity in books is, and pop culture writ large, is that for a very long time, possibly up until like the last 10 years, if you bought a ticket for a movie, if you bought a book, if you turned on a TV show, is going to be a primarily white cast. It was going to be primarily straight. You'd probably have a male main character. And you were just like, that was the everyman. In fact, a lot of times that's what they're called. Like, that character trope is the everyman. And I think it's important, you know, people are like, ugh, are we just like, you know, beating the diversity drum to beat the diversity drum?
Tokenizing our characters and all of that.
Yeah. And that's another thing, like, as a white cis woman writing, I do have characters who are non-binary and trans. I do have characters who are different races than I am. One rule of thumb I try to do is not to have my main character be someone whose identity I cannot say that I know firsthand, because I don't want to have people think, oh, well, she knows what she's talking about, or this woman has no idea. Why does she assume that she has the right to write from this person's perspective? But I do, like, friend groups today are diverse, or should be. Like I just want to make that reality appear on the page. So that's my personal take on it. I hope that I can't answer this question, but I hope I do it in a way that doesn't feel forced. If I do, hopefully I'll get better over time.
And I think that's the key of it, is just writing reality, right? And writing stories that are true to our lived experiences, but also to the lived experiences of people who might be picking up our books.
Yes, absolutely.
So thinking about that, skewing back towards romance as a genre, what are some of your favorite tropes and why?
Oh, okay. Let's see. This is a contentious one. Some people hate a big miss or a big miscommunication. I don't love it when someone misunderstands something and storms out of a room, but if it can really unravel nicely over the course of the novel. Actually, I just recently read Ashley Herring Blake's novel, Delilah Green Doesn't Care. Which is a sapphic.
I'm getting a lot of really good recommendations. I don't read a lot of fiction, so this is helpful. Thank you.
There you go. It's a great sapphic romance novel, and it's not a miscommunication so much as the parts of these characters that you can tell they seem to think of as their best parts are actually getting in the way of their happiness. And they're having conversations, but because it's all so new to them, you're not having those deep heart-to-hearts that you would if you'd known someone for a year or two. You're having the surface level where you're like, I'm introducing you to my baggage. And so it's just really cool to see that happen. On a spicier level in romance, I can't help it. I'm a sucker for the there's just one bed trope.
Do tell, why?
Well, I think to keep it PG, I think it makes sense. And then I love forced proximity. I love farcical situations, like physical comedy, which I've learned is very difficult to write for a novel-based audience. But the secret is it comes down to the rhythm, which you as a poet would appreciate, I think. I love any sort of farcical sort of situation where it's like, for instance, in How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days, because they're having to pretend to still be deeply in love while they're in the process of getting divorced, there will be times where they've got fingers in each other's faces, like whisper hissing an argument, and then a friend walks into the room and they have to like suddenly be canoodling in a less than convincing manner. So yeah, those are some of my favorite tropes. Trying to think if I can think of any that I don't care for. I'm not going to. No. I will say one other one that I do enjoy is, I'm sorry, I'm just a sucker for this. The Who Did This to You? Like that sort of like protective kind of, yeah. I think we always want someone who's going to protect us and support us. And that's like that, but on steroids.
I think that's similar to mine, which is I hate everybody but her.
Yes. Oh, and Grumpy Sunshine.
Grumpy Sunshine.
Yeah.
Team Jess for my Gilmore Girls fans. So.
Yes. At first I thought you were going to be like Nick and Jess, like from New Girl, because that's also a great Grumpy Sunshine. But yes, Team Jess. Yeah.
Okay. So your books and the titles especially do reference pop culture, but again, done so in that very tongue-in-cheek, winky kind of way. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on referencing pop culture in literature? How are you able to incorporate these references without keeping your stories locked in a specific time period that maybe then dates it just a few years away from publication?
Okay. So when it comes to including pop culture, because if you're my friend or you've talked to me for 5 minutes, I'm probably going to drop pop culture into the conversation. It's kind of my love language. I feel like a way that I try to make sure it isn't dated and also so that it's not niche is I won't reference things that are happening like in the last 5 years, because who knows if that has staying power. I'll try to reference things that are a little bit older that are still in the zeitgeist. You know, when it was happening, we weren't sure, you know, if the Was Up frogs from the Budweiser commercials were going to last past 1998. But I say "What's up" and people know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Whereas there are things happening now, TikTok trends that may not be around in 5 years. People will be like, I don't remember Rasputin. What is that? Yeah, that'll be a dark, dark day. But
although I did have a senior I teach high school, and I had a senior make a Tumblr reference, so I felt relevant for the first time in about 10 years. That was
so nice. Yeah, Tumblr's having a renaissance, I think. It really is. I also think one thing I'll do, the great thing is my publisher is based in the Hachette Book Group office in London. And so sometimes there will be a cultural disconnect. My editor will be like, I'm not sure I know what that is. And so I'll be like, oh, it's not important. I'll take it out. Or if I was using the pop culture reference as a metaphor, I'll be like, what if I add all these context clues? Then will you get it? And she's like, okay, yes, we can keep that one in.
That's not something I had considered. So the books are published in the UK, but distributed in the UK as well, or mostly just distributed in the US?
They're distributed globally. Right now, it's you can get paperback copies. It's wide for the win with paperback, and then ebooks are just on Amazon right now. But you know, I leave the distribution stuff up to them. It is internationally distributed though.
And then is that something you factor into your writing process, or do you just focus on the story first and then let everything else?
I try to focus on the story first and then have my editor, who's much savvier at that sort of thing, go, you know, we might want to do something that people who are reading in Germany will understand, you know, that sort of thing. I was also going to say, because I mentioned TikTok, and I do have references to TikTok and Instagram and How to Keep a Husband. I think with that, it wasn't so much drilling down into a certain meme, but rather into the culture that has sprung up around Instagram and TikTok influencers, because I think that will at the very least be like, wow, strange in the same way that having a pet rock or collecting pogs was, you know? And to that point, I remember having a conversation with you over coffee where we were talking about technology in books and worrying about dating a book by including a certain technology in it. And one thing I said in defense of myself, if I'm allowed to put myself in the same rarefied air as Virginia Woolf, is that Virginia Woolf has a telephone in, I think, at least To the Lighthouse and also maybe Mrs. Dalloway. And the telephone is still very new technology at the time, relatively new to have it in most homes rather than just one home on the block or whatever. And so I was like, you know, Jenny was taking a risk with that. But, you know, sometimes you just can't get around it with the communication. Sometimes technology feels like it's here to stay. So.
And then we'll find out in 5 years if that's the case.
Yeah. Oh, and I will also say I recently was asked about, I do have some plot points in there related to, like, COVID isn't hitting you over the head with it, but it takes place with timestamps from 2017 till 2022. And so I didn't want to glance away or pretend that the pandemic hadn't happened. So I was asked about that, and I was like, am I going to be commenting on the COVID-19 pandemic as well as someone will be able to in 10 years when there's a historical framework for it? No, of course not, because there will be that time and distance creating hindsight. There will be, you know, cultural touch points, social, political touch points. But I felt disingenuous. Speaking to reality, you know, I felt disingenuous being like, it's set in this time period and I'm not going to talk about it. Yeah. So.
And I think there's a difference between writing a book about a pandemic and then writing a book that takes place during a pandemic, right? And so just making sure that with your style, your references are there, but it's not consuming every aspect of the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well put.
Thank you. So I want to circle back because you touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but for you, what is the connection between film and your writing?
Oh, I love film. One of my favorite electives I took in college, at University of Virginia, I was an English literature and a media studies double major. And I loved taking film studies courses. In fact, I think sometimes I learned more about narrative structure and the momentum of story and also just like subtext, the subtext of theme from those courses.
Which I just taught to my high schoolers today. So subtext, yay.
Yay, subtext. I'm sure they knew all about it, just like you were introducing them to it in literature. They're like, oh, you mean when someone texts one thing and means something completely other?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Romance novel.
Correct.
Okay. Yes. So I, number one, that is a huge foundation for me because that was around the time when I was also like in college when I was first starting to take my writing seriously. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of that informed my nascent creative writing. And I also think culturally, unless you're writing in a very esoteric genre, there's such a book to film pipeline now. And I just feel like those two media are so closely connected for a lot of us. It's hard for me to divorce them in my brain. And thank goodness nowadays, most publishers will let you use comp titles that are both books and films, because a lot of times when I'm first thinking about, especially the mood of a piece, I'm like I compare How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days to Beth O'Leary's work, Emily Henry's work, and then like The Big Chill and Parks and Rec, because that's what it makes me think of. So I hope that answers the question.
It does.
Yes. I've never spoken in a soundbite in my life, so
it's okay. So you talked earlier about being genre agnostic as a reader. I'm curious as to how genre impacts your writing. So do you consider genre while writing, or is it story first, worry about everything else later?
Okay. When I get the idea for a piece, it usually comes to me as a what if question first. Like, what if this crazy scenario happened? And then comes the characters, and then comes the plot based around that inciting incident. I think there could be a case made that you can take that what if and make it any sort of genre. In fact, I was reading a thriller called The Snowstorm earlier today, and I was thinking, my gosh, this is about a group of friends getting together, reuniting after 10 years where there was a tragedy in a cabin for New Year's. I was like, this could have been a rom-com, and instead it's like a slasher thriller. So I guess there could be an argument made for it could be any genre, but generally because of the way my brain thinks of mood with film and everything, and because of the way I think of those what if questions, it very quickly goes like, okay, this feels more romantic to me. Ooh, this feels a little bit more dark and eldritch, you know, that sort of thing. I have written some pretty spooky short stories, so we contain multitudes, everybody.
So for you, there's a clear connection between mood and genre.
For me, yes. I'm not going to argue that that's the case for everyone. I don't think we would have like Buffy the Vampire Slayer if that were the case.
Fair.
So, although that's a blending of so many different genres.
Yes.
So,
and I would argue a lot of your work as well is blending of genres.
I hope so, because you know, for as much as I think we should take romance seriously, there's also, being a writer in a genre space, you worry so much that like you're being put in a little box. It's like, oh, readers who don't read romance don't want to hear from you.
So that actually leads really nicely into my next question, romance as a genre. You touched on this a little bit before, but I just want to circle back to it. It oftentimes gets a lot of flack, especially in high literary spaces, right? Yes. Does it deserve the flack that it gets, and how has the genre grown over the years?
So I'm actually like kind of nervous about this on a practical level right now, because we're both going to AWP in a couple of weeks, which is a very literary conference. And I'm worried that when people see on my name tag like book tour author, and they're like, oh, what do you write? And I'll be like, I write rom-coms. They're going to be like, and get away from me as quick as they can. But I think, and this is me getting on my soapbox, fair warning. I think because, as I said, romance and all of its subgenres tend to be targeted towards readers who are women and femme-presenting non-binary people. It tends to be denigrated for that reason. It's not serious literature because it's commercial, and it's commercial fiction that women read. And even though women are like demographically the bigger percentage of readers, no offense to the men in the audience, I love you guys as well, but it's just, that's a very easy reason to go, oh, like my uncle used to say, like, oh, a chick flick, or like chick lit, you know, it's not serious. I think sometimes, as I said before, romance is being used as a springboard to discuss things like housing equity, marriage equality. It's a vehicle to have relationships between women presented on the page that maybe isn't presented in other spaces. And then also sometimes it's just a delightful, fun romp. And there is no harm in that. So much of life these days is difficult and scary and hard and stressful. And sometimes it's nice to just lose yourself in a book for 2 days. And, you know, there's the part of me that's like, oh, to be a great lofty writer, I have to have all these ideas. And then there's the other part of me that's like, if someone consumes my book, like sometimes people tear through a book in like a day. If someone consumes my book and I made them laugh, like, job done, you know? So yeah, I don't think that I think romance has grown a lot since it was Fabio bare-chested on the cover. But in defense of that, hey, you know, women lead rough lives. Sometimes you need to escape into imagining Fabio like breathing on your ear, kind of a little bit.
I vote we bring those covers back.
Bring those covers back.
And I think you bring up an interesting point, because for some people, fantasy is traversing into Middle Earth with your elves and your fellowship, right?
Hi.
Wink.
It's me. It's my entire personality.
Correct. And then sometimes fantasy is almost getting a divorce with your husband and then working through it in a housing crisis, right? And all of that should have the space to exist. Yeah,
and I think you bring in fantasy, and you're talking about the fantasy, the escapism of reading, of course. And I partake of both of those. Lord of the Rings, I do a reread every year. But then also, like, to use the word fantasy and say, you know, obviously I'm a romance writer, but hi, genre agnostic reader here. Fantasy, a lot of different genres are used for that delightful romp. And then also like N.K. Jemisin, like there are some amazing fantasy writers who are using that platform to discuss important issues to their identity and to their readers' identities.
So one final question as we wrap up our discussion.
God, I talk a lot.
But we love to hear it. Writing can be one of the most isolating art forms that there is. And it holds this really strange place between being a craft, because it is a daily practice and it takes a lot of work in order to create this longer form text. But at the same time, community is necessary. And this is an example of that, right? So what for you is the importance of community as a writer?
Oh, gosh. Well, this is a great opportunity to say thank you guys all for being here, for being a part of my community, even in this little way. Also, really quick, just I want to put a pin in it and come back to it. What you said about a daily practice, I want to mention that. So if I forget at the end of whatever diatribe is about to be extemporized out of my mouth, remind me.
Noted.
Thank you. So community is huge, because like you said, it's writing a lot of times is just sitting at a desk waiting for characters to sprout out of your brain and do stuff. You're just staring at a blank page. Not only the isolation, but the bad times, like when you've just gotten rejection after rejection and you're not sure if you're gonna keep going. That's really tough. Feeling like you've hit a brick wall with your abilities and not being sure if you know, like, if there's anywhere to go, if you've hit the ceiling of what you can do. these are times when community can be so important, because attending a writing workshop, having a critique partner, going to a fantastic poetry night like the one that happens every Monday at Rain Dogs. Quick shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Like, the amount of talent this town has is insane. I'm glad I'm telling people about Jacksonville. They deserve to know about it. It's just like, those moments are important because either they're going to make you better, they're going to lift very low spirits, they're going to make you feel less alone. Speaking of critique partners, my critique partner, Hurley Winkler, who is on her way to Miami right now, she couldn't be here tonight, has a Substack called Lonely Victories. And it's based on the idea that, like, when we write, if we have success, it is a lonely victory. So we should have community. I was trading chapters back and forth with her. The chapters I was trading were what became My Big Fake Wedding. And by, I think, like the second or third chapter, I had her hooked. She was like, I need to know what happens next. And I remember she wrote at the top of my manuscript pages that night, like with the rest of her annotations, keep going, keep going, keep going. And that got me through a lot of horrible query trench kind of moments where an agent would go, this is great, but it's not for me, or this isn't quirky, this is delusional, like all of that sort of rejection that you get. I kept going. And in fact, part of the dedication is to Hurley Winkler. It says, you told me, keep going, keep going, keep going. I did, and here it is. Because I thought that's
beautiful.
Super important. It made her cry. I love making
Mission
people
accomplished.
laugh. I love making people cry. It's like that episode of Friends. See, pop culture reference when Monica's like, I'm going to make you cry with my toast at your wedding. And the pin that I dropped.
Yes, the daily practice.
Daily practice. I love being a writer who's able to, like, I have cultivated my life as a freelance editor and as a writer so that most weekdays, if I'm not up against a client deadline, I am able to write for 30 minutes to 2 hours, maybe. Not everyone has the ability to do that because they have work, family, children, whatever sort of obligations that keep them from doing that, or that's just not their writing type. For the longest time, I fell into that assumption that there's writing, everyone should write every day. And then at a different lit chat in the fall, I met Valerie Bowman. We had coffee, and she was telling me about like this personality quiz she'd taken where there are different writer types, and she's a phoenix, which means she'll go for dormant periods and then just out of the ashes spring into a hotel room away from her husband and kids and write like a maniac for a week. And that sounds like hell to me. But for her, that's like the best it could be. So I don't think you like, if you're an aspiring writer out there and you're not writing every day, don't worry about it. If you're a writer, the act of living is research. So.
And I think that's a huge part that people forget about the writing process. You, like you said in the beginning, you have to write what you know, you have to experience things, and that's where all of the good stuff is going to come from.
Oh yeah. All the messy, beautiful sensory experience, amazingness of it.
That's always my best writing advice for any young writers. Just go out there, make a lot of mistakes, don't get into too much trouble, get into some trouble, and experience life, because your stories will be much richer for it.
You're like their Cubana Miss Frizzle. You're like, get messy and then write a poem.
Dale, porque dijiste, yeah.
Awesome.
So I think now we are ready for some audience questions.
Sweet. Oh, I think are there are some notes
under your chairs. There should be clipboards. Yep. So feel free to write them down, and we will.
I can't wait to answer your question. Just wanted to let you know, they have rules here. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry.
Awesome. Okay, so first question: how did you decide to write romance, and would you ever write in another genre?
Oh my!
I know the answer to this.
Do you want to tell the nice people?
No.
Oh darn. Okay. I kind of just fell into it backwards. I had the what if idea for My Big Fake Wedding, and then I got a 2-book deal, so I had to write another rom-com, and I have found that I really enjoy it. I'm already, you saw on Twitter the other day, kind of working on some vibey scenes for the next one, so hopefully it'll find a place. Yeah. And I would love to write in another genre. I mentioned having some like creepy ideas, and I would love to get to try those out, but we'll see what the future holds. That's the thing about being a writer that I've learned as being a writer, but also a type A personality. You cannot plan for what will happen next. You just have to like be a little flexible.
I think too, for me, I know that sometimes the genre calls me, and even though I try to write in other genres, the poems will still come out. So
the poems are like, no, we're not done with you yet.
Similar for fiction, but yeah.
I don't know, sometimes.
Yeah.
But I love the way you put it. I'm like, I don't know, and you're like, the muse. So
pretty much.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. Another question: will you please discuss how to find a freelance editor?
Oh, okay. Sorry for those of you who attended my workshop on Saturday. I'm going to be a little repetitious here. You can tune in for the next question. Great ways to find freelance editors. The Editorial Freelancers Association, freelance editors websites, Reedsy, REEDSY. These are all great places to look for freelancers that specifically work in publishing, like books, graphic design, that sort of thing. And ask them questions like, do you have any clients that you've worked with before I can speak to, or client testimonials? Just ask them the questions that you want, see if it feels like a good fit, see if it's in your price range. You know, I mean, we do need to earn a living wage, but you should also, you know, if someone's out of Too Rich for Your Blood, go and get a beta reader. But sorry, I had to switch brains from speaking about writing to speaking about editing, and that was kind of a hard swerve to do. But start with the EFA and Reedsy and go from there.
And I think also this is where building your writer community is really helpful.
Yes, because writers will have, thank you, that's a great observation. They'll have recommendations.
So if you don't know, someone else will know in your corner. So to kind of switch gears back to being an author, what was the most difficult aspect of becoming a published author?
Oh,
all of it.
Imposter syndrome.
Yes.
That was hard. You feel like you're querying and you're pitching for so long. You've had this idea. You know it's great. Your early readers say it's great. No one seems to think it's great. You think that when you sign that contract and they announce the deal, you're suddenly going to flip a switch in your brain and be like, I am a published author. No. I have to do like this mantra in my car where I'm like, I am a successful published author. Like I have to tell myself that. And finally, I'd been intrinsic motivating myself out the wazoo, and finally I got some extrinsic motivation from my editor in November. It was the perfect mix of tough love and encouragement I needed, because honestly, the imposter syndrome was impacting me promoting myself and my books for the longest time. I had a quiet little launch for my big fake wedding because I was like, no one wants to hear about me. And I fell into that fallacy, my silly little romance novel. So I didn't do that much to promote it. I was like, that's my publisher's job, even though I know publicists are continually strapped for time. And so in November, when she said that, I was like, okay, let's get out there and sell some books. And I just needed that push out of the nest, I think. But imposter syndrome has got to have been the hardest part.
And I think you're speaking to this fact that it's different for every book. So can you talk a little bit more about that process and how it changed between books?
The promotional aspect of it. I also think, and maybe there's some people out there who could just flip the switch and say, okay, great. They believed in me enough to give me the contract. I'm successful. I'm an author now. Let me promote my stuff. More power to you if you're that personality. For me, when I'm new to a circumstance, I was the kid who would be in line for a roller coaster going, how many loops does it have? Does it shake around? And then I would have the best time once I got on there. But I had to know every single part of it inside and out before I could be okay with it. And so I think having that first book as a learning experience was what I needed. I was like, oh, so this doesn't move books. And it's all trial and error. I think right now for book number 2, I'm really cultivating like social media as the place where my audience, like my devoted lovers of my work live, and then trying to do more stuff like BookBub and Goodreads. Although Goodreads is more for readers than for authors, is what I'm finding.
Correct.
Yes.
So now we're going to get into some more nitty gritty numbers kind of details.
Ooh.
So be as specific as you want.
Okay.
How many books have you sold in your first year? And I guess you can decide if you want to split that up between the novels or novel by novel, or give like a general estimate.
That is a little lower than I would like. But let me see. I'm trying to think about the latest sales report that I got. I mean, it's in the 4 figures. I think that's what I feel comfortable saying.
Those are not poetry numbers. That's way better than poetry. I'm not even going to lie.
And meanwhile, there's the imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh God, if I say the number, people are going to be like, God, that's low. And then because I'm published by a very commercial imprint. And so there are people who are like at the top of the Kindle bestseller lists, which is about as high as you can go when you're, you know, at a primarily digital publisher. And so I'm like, oh, my namby-pamby little numbers. And you're like, those aren't poetry numbers. So yeah.
And I think too, you also spoke a little bit to this, but your first book does not determine the second book and how that's going to sell.
Right.
Have you noticed like a sharp increase from there?
Right. So actually, the reason that I wrote these 2 books so quickly back to back, if I can use that question to pivot, is that I keep mentioning that Bookouture is a very commercial publisher. Part of their sales and marketing model is that they've noticed, especially among genre readers who tend to be voracious. I mentioned readers getting through a book in 24, 48 hours. If there's another book available for them to download right away, they are more likely to purchase the first book, actually, you know? And so I have seen a little bit of like a 1-2 punch now that the second book is out. In fact, first book, it was like marketing was like, we're going to do Facebook ads. I was like, great, that's it. But it's part of the strategy, right? You know, you sort of soft launch with that first one. And then the second one, they're like, not only are we doing those ads, but we're doing like some Amazon countdown deals. Actually, I won't mention that. I'll let you guys figure it out. If you look at my Instagram, you'll see a deal that's going on right now. I won't mention it because we have a fantastic indie bookshop here that is selling copies. They're doing countdown deals, and those countdown deals, like people went out and bought that, about 600 people over the course of like one day because of BookBub. BookBub moves books. They have all read My Big Fake Wedding, and now you're starting to see How to Keep a Husband number spike because of that. So yeah. So while yes, book 1 doesn't dictate how book 2 sells, I think especially in genre fiction, once you have momentum,
keep it moving.
Yeah.
So this is a fun question. How many copies did you give away to family and friends?
Let's see. I tried to give my mom a copy, but she insisted on buying one, which was really sweet.
That's the correct answer.
I was like, thank you,
Buy
Mama.
your friend's book.
Thank you, Mama. Or at the very least, if you get a free copy, review it.
Yes.
Reviews cost nothing and help immensely. I gave away to some people who are on my like street team, like who hype me. I was like carrot stick. That's kind of how I am with the free copies.
Nice.
Sorry. That's not as touchy-feely as I think people were hoping.
But I think that's the best answer because it is a work of art and you do care about your friends and family, but this is something you work deeply hard on and you want the numbers to reflect that.
That's true.
So totally pivoting. This is now about critique partners.
Okay.
What does a critique partner look like? And is it friends that are saying, oh, this is good? Is it someone reaming you to shreds? What is a good balance of what a critique partner should do?
I think it depends on you and your critique partner. The first time that you meet with a critique partner, well, first off, you have to go up to your writing friend. I would say very hard to cold pitch someone into being your critique partner. So generally how I've seen people meet their critique partner is like they're at a workshop and they bond really well. And so they'll be like, hey, do you want to swap pages? Luckily, mine lives in town, so we can get together and have coffee. But then, you know, you might live in a different city than your critique partner altogether, so it's going to be via email. As far as whether you want them to be nice and gentle or a bit scrubbier, depends on your personality types. We actually... like, it would be a constructive critique, but so that we actually wanted to meet up for that instead of going, oh, let's just have dinner and chat, we would call it a cheerleading session. And so it was compliment sandwich. So it would start with everything we loved about what we'd read and then go into, but you know, I think here on page 3, that's where it kind of starts sagging a little bit. So I think a critique partner is there for, should always be there for constructive criticism. It really just depends on whether you want a spoonful of sugar with your medicine or not.
I would add to that, make sure they have some level of genre and craft awareness, because good advice is only good advice if you can use it. So it has to be more than just I enjoyed or I didn't enjoy, but craft-wise, what's happening on the page.
Yeah, exactly. That's so good. I'm sorry. I'm so close to the answer that I can't see the forest for the trees.
It helps that I teach this on a daily basis.
Fantastic.
So another question, when you first approach the industry, and this is sort of like, deciding that you want to be a traditionally published author. When you presented your work, did you approach agents first? Did you go to publishers directly? Is there an order? Or nowadays, is it sort of choose your own adventure and make it work for you?
Okay. So when I first started approaching publishers, I started querying agents. Generally and traditionally, that is the way to get a book published. Traditionally, the agent is your legal and business representative to the publisher. They sell the rights on your behalf and collect a commission. So I started with querying agents. My plan was to continue to query agents, but then I, out of the blue, had an editing client who said, we had a coaching call and I was potentially going to edit his manuscript. But then he said, you know what? I don't need you to, because actually I found these people who wanted it. He had the same sort of woes that I had in finding an agent. It's too niche. People aren't going to get it, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, book a tour. I've never heard of these people. And I Googled them, fully expecting to see yet another Vanity Press, like red flag kind of website. But I was like, oh, they're an imprint of Hachette Book Group. They have a different sales model, but honestly, I think the fact that they don't give an advance, they give you a higher cut of royalties, allows them to pick up more mid-list authors.
Which is so important these days in publishing.
Yeah, mid-list shouldn't be a 4-letter word, but I think so many times they're like, oh, we have to go for the bestseller.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, not doing anything over Christmas break 2021. Let me submit to them. About a week later, they were like, do you have your full manuscript? I was like, here you go. They were like, we'll tell you by mid-February. And around this time last year, I had a phone call with a lovely, very posh sounding British woman. And she said, we'd like to offer you a 2-book deal. And I said, can you give me the evening to think about it, to sleep on it? And I proceeded to go and drink champagne with my friends because I knew it was going to be a yes. I just didn't want to seem overeager.
Correct.
So generally you should start out by querying agents, but there are, because 20 years on to digital publishing being a thing, there are so many different options out there. There are hybrid presses. There are traditional imprints that allow for unagented manuscripts to be submitted. So number one, I would just say do your research. That can look like active research where you're Googling things and reading up on things. It can also look like being on book Twitter and following agents, publishers, other writers, and learning by osmosis what to do. Just make sure that you know what being taken for a ride looks like.
Yes.
And also what your personal version of compromising would be, where you don't want to go beyond the pale.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this is a total pivot. What is your favorite rom-com?
Oh, okay.
You could go book and movie, book or movie. Your choice.
Okay. Thank you. Favorite book is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. I'm neurodivergent, and Helen Hoang is, and so is her main character in that book. And I felt seen. See, this is why romance is important. And then movie, I love Elizabethtown. I know it's polarizing. I know people hate that movie, but it's honestly my favorite Cameron Crowe movie.
Ooh. Them's fighting words.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I know. People are like, almost famous. How dare you? But I don't know. I also thought they did Kirsten Dunst's character dirty, calling her a manic pixie dream girl when she was doing the emotional work that every woman has done in a movie for a man ever.
Correct.
So anyway.
In a beanie. I think that was the difference.
Yes, a red beanie. It's like, oh, hipster trash.
Correct.
Yeah.
So do you have a stockpile of stories, pivoting back to writer life? Okay. Do you have a stockpile of stories that you want to tell, or do you just think of your stories as you go?
I have quite a, like, you know how people say, like, I've got that on the back burner? I've got, like, one of those industrial grill tops at this point. So I'm, like, trying to get through my idea for book 3 so I can have a draft to submit for my publisher's consideration here soon. But then I have, like, at last count, maybe like 5 other ideas I want to. I'm not going to stop writing anytime soon, is what I'm trying to say.
And I think it's funny how that happens, where the more you write, the more ideas
Yes.
come.
Yes.
I feel like the same thing happened to me, even as a poet.
Yes, I think, like I said, you don't have to be a daily writer. One thing I will say in defense of daily writing is it really has allowed me to open, like once the creative juices start flowing, like one of my friends who's just started journaling every day is like, I have a few short story ideas I want to write. Is that normal? I was like, yeah.
Yes.
She was like, it's just my ADHD brain. I was like, no.
You're working those muscles.
Yeah, exactly.
So publishing these days, you touched on this a little bit, but considering the sort of battle, especially with romance, with self-publishing versus traditional publishing, what is the benefit of traditional publishing and getting things like a 2-book deal and so on?
Yeah. So in defense, I'm going to start this by answering the counterpoint. In defense of self-publishing and indie publishing, it's a great space for genre writers, especially once you have like a number of books out in the market. I work with a lot of self-published authors as a freelance editor in the romance space, both for straight audiences and sapphic audiences, and they make, I don't know if they're paying their bills with it, but they make a pretty good bank. The benefit of having a 2-book deal, and I'll say that trade publishing is a very saturated market right now when it comes to rom-coms. It's the hot thing. Articles are being written about it, so it's really hard to stand out from the noise. So if you can persevere through the querying trenches, it could be valuable. But does that make sense? Is there more to it?
The question was also asking, like, what is a 2-book deal? How is that different from a regular deal?
Yeah. So a 2-book deal just means that the contract, like you are contracted to produce 2 books. That's essentially what it means. Definitely you need to soul search about the production timeline. Do you have 2 manuscripts already completed, or are you going to have to draft one like I did? Do you have the time to do that within the time that they're allowing, especially if you get like a traditional deal where you have an advance? Because if you don't turn in that manuscript when they ask you to, you could owe the publisher serious money.
Correct.
So things to think about. I think also sometimes 2-book deal, 3-book deal can be like a way for the publisher to use as a publicity tool. Like, oh, look at this new and happening author we gave a 2-book deal to.
Everything is marketing.
Everything is marketing to the point where it's like exhausting sometimes.
Yes. This is a great question about craft and writing process. So when creating main and supporting characters, what are some key questions you ask yourself about each one?
One thing, I want them to be supportive of each other's personalities, but I also want them to be foils for one another in certain ways. I really enjoy having like those personalities where you're like, these 2 people would not be friends in real life, like Sophie and How to Keep a Husband for 10 Days. It's like, wow, I can see why she was part of the group when they were younger, and now it really feels like she's grown apart from them. I also just, I don't know, this is something that doesn't happen on a conscious level for me. My main character tends to be like the part of my personality that is presented here in front of you right now, like very like loquacious and intense, and then my supporting characters tend to be like the snarky things that I don't say out loud, like the sassy best friend sort of vibes. It's not necessarily a conscious process for me what I do and don't do with them. It might be just like draft 1, I see how they're going to play with each other, and then I mess with the dials when I'm editing.
So this will be our final question.
Sorry I talk so much, guys. I wish I could get to all your questions.
I know. These are all excellent questions as well. When you were building your writing community, where did you find each other? Was it conferences, college? Were you in the same genre, and so on? I just have kind of gathered my writing community over time. I'm not originally from Jacksonville, so I had friends at university that became a huge part of my writing life. I met I can't even remember how we met, but through like the writing community here in Jax, which I first found. Bridge 8 is still around, but I think that's what it was. Okay. The Bridge 8 flash reading series, probably. And I met one of my best friends through a poetry workshop that they had. As a prose writer, I was like, I know I need a better grasp of language, so I took a poetry workshop, and I met my best friend Emma there. So it just you'll pick people up, you'll know whether you vibe with them or not, and then
you go from there. The way that you make any friend, it's just a friend who has the same interests and craft abilities as you.
Yep.